Tzfat. 1. The Ramak. One of the greatest of all theoretical Kabbalists, and one of the main systematizers of its philosophy, was Rabbi Moshe Cordovero of Tzfat. So respected was he that he was the first Kabbalist honored by being called by his initials, and even today, initiates call him the Ramak. Until his time, only the greatest Talmudic masters had been given this distinction, having the word "the" added before their initials, to indicate that they were a solid part of the tradition. Thus, for example, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, Maimonides, became known as the Rambam. Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, Nachmanides, became the Ramban, and Rabbi Shlomo ben Adret became the Rashba. The Ramak was born in Tzfat, a city that was to become famed as a center of the Kabbalah. At a very tender age, he gained a reputation as a most extraordinary genius. Besides his knowledge in Kabbalah, he was a Talmudic scholar and philosopher of the highest rank, and was widely respected in these fields. But his main interest was the systematization of the Kabbalah, setting it into a philosophical structure, a task that had already been started by Rabbi Judah Chait and Rabbi Meir Gabbai. The Zohar had been accepted as the foundation of Kabbalah, but for the most part, its system appeared as complex and unstructured as that of the Bible and Talmud. It took a genius of the stature of Maimonides to unravel and systematize the philosophical system of the Bible and Talmud, clearly outlining the organizing principles underlying its structure. What the Rambam had done for the more conventional tradition, the Ramak was to do for the Kabbalah. Like Maimonides, the Ramak defended his system against its detractors, and in most cases his words were directed against those philosophers who refused to accept the authority of the Kabbalah. In one place, he states that the philosophers can only surmise what exists in the metaphysical realm, while the Kabbalist can actually see it. But besides being the preeminent philosopher of the Kabbalistic world, the Ramak was also thoroughly familiar with its mystical elements. He was an expert in the various systems of meditative and practical Kabbalah, and although he rarely speaks about these areas, there is enough in his writings to indicate an intimate familiarity. Thus, in one place, he quotes a long section from Abulafia's Or HaSechel. Elsewhere, he actually mentions the book and its author by name, saying that this is the most important system involving the pronunciation of the divine name. No mere theorist, the Ramak was also actively engaged in Kabbalah meditation, through a method known as Girushin, or divorce. We know very little of this method, even though an entire booklet called Sefer Girushin, Book of Divorce, was written regarding the insight that the Ramak gained through this method. Most probably, it consisted of meditating on a given scripture, or perhaps repeating it over and over like a mantra, until one could relate to it on a high meditative state. One would then gain deep insight into it, without having to analyze it logically. The word divorce in this context most probably meant divorce from the physical, even though it also obviously had the connotation of separation and seclusion from inhabited places. In this respect, it is very much like the word hitbodedut, which refers to both physical and mental seclusion. The Ramak founded a Kabbalah academy in Tzfat, and until the rise of the Ari, was considered the dean of the Tzfat school. Among his disciples were many of the luminaries of Tzfat, including Rabbi Eliyahu Davidas, author of Reshit Chochmah, Beginning of Wisdom, and Rabbi Chaim Vital, who later became the Ari's Boswell. It is reported that the prophet Elijah revealed himself to the Ramak, and when he died, the Ari said that he saw a pillar of fire following his bier. It was largely under the leadership of the Ramak that Tzfat became the greatest center of Kabbalah that the world has ever known, a city whose very name is synonymous with the Kabbalah. But there were also other factors that contributed to this, and it seems as if all the forces of providence had conspired to create this great city of saints and scholars. 3 events in the late 1400s were to have a most important influence. The first was the discovery of printing. Gutenberg had printed his Bible around 1450, and by 1475, the first Hebrew book had been printed. By the 1490s, over 100 Hebrew titles had been published, putting the tools of scholarship into the hands of almost everyone. Whereas scholars had previously had to make do with a limited number of expensive and often barely legible manuscripts, they now could make use of rapidly growing personal libraries, having all necessary information at their fingertips. The information explosion led to the need of systematization, and it was during these generations that interest grew, and the need was seen to systematize the entire body of Jewish knowledge, including the Kabbalah. It was during this period that the era of Rishonim, early codifiers, came to a close, and that of Achronim, later codifiers, began. While the Rishonim were considered to be primary sources, the Achronim were merely secondary sources, who dealt mainly with clarifying and writing commentaries on the works of the Rishonim. While the Rishonim studied and published manuscripts, the Achronim studied and published printed books. The second major event was Columbus's discovery of the New World in 1492. As a result of the change in worldview, much of earlier philosophy had to be re-examined, and the philosophical schools, which had opposed the Kabbalah, were significantly weakened. The discoveries of that time expanded man's horizons, and people began to seek similar expansion of their spiritual lives. This led many to explore the mind-expanding systems taught by the Kabbalah. Most explosive, however, was the Spanish Inquisition, culminating with the expulsion of all Jews from Spain, also in 1492. Spain had been an important center of Jewish learning in general, and Kabbalah in particular, for many centuries, and with the expulsion, its leaders were forced to find a new center. We shall encounter a few individuals who left Spain as youths, most notably Joseph Caro, who was 4 at the time, and Jacob Birab, who was 18. But most important for the initial development of Tzfat were 2 mature Kabbalists, both named Joseph, Rabbi Joseph Saragosi and Rabbi Joseph Taitatzak. Until this time, Tzfat had been a small Jewish community, not exerting any known influence. In the early 1490s, its spiritual leader, Rabbi Peretz Kolobo, had to maintain a small grocery in order to support himself, the community being too small to pay him. All this, however, was changed with the arrival of Rabbi Joseph Saragosi. Born in Saragossa, Spain, the birthplace of Abulafia, Rabbi Joseph fled with his co-religionist in 1492. Possibly following Abulafia's path, he settled for a while in Sicily. From there, he emigrated to Beirut, and in 1496, described as an absolute saint, we find him moving to Sidon, where he accepted the post of chief rabbi. From there, he assumed the role of rabbi in Tzfat, which he began to build up as a center for Kabbalah. One of his first tasks as rabbi was to start an academy, where both the Talmud and Kabbalah were taught. Saragosi was respected by Jew and Muslim alike for his appeasing spirit, and he was loved and revered like an angel of peace. The author of Sefer Haredim, a younger contemporary, writes, "Joseph Saragosi, teacher of the Radbaz, always brought peace between man and his neighbors, and between husband and wife, even among the Gentiles. He was worthy of seeing the prophet Elijah." The Radbaz mentioned here was Rabbi David Abu Zimra, who had also been exiled from Spain. Together with his father, he had settled in Tzfat, and he soon became an important disciple of Rabbi Joseph. Although the Radbaz later gained fame as one of the greatest authorities on Jewish law, he also wrote numerous books on Kabbalah. He was aware of Abulafia's writings, and in at least one place mentions his Chaye Olam Haba. It is highly significant to note that Rabbi Judah Albertini, author of Sulam Aliyah, Ladder of Ascent, and one of the most important teachers of Abulafia's methods, was still alive at the time. He was rabbi in Jerusalem, and continued to teach until 1519. It would appear highly probable that the Radbaz made his acquaintance, and there was possibly also communication between Albertini and Saragosi. Albertini had also lived on the Iberian Peninsula in Portugal and was most probably known to the Spanish Kabbalists. The Radbaz emigrated to Egypt in 1514, and 3 years later, Egypt was overrun by the Turks. Abraham Castro, who had been appointed Master of the Mint, elevated the Radbaz to the position of Chief Rabbi of Cairo. The two were undoubtedly very close, and the Radbaz taught Castro the mysteries of the Kabbalah, informing him of the schools in Jerusalem and Tzfat. Later, in 1538, we find Castro as a patron and disciple of Rabbi Joseph Tzayach, who had succeeded Albertini as the leader of the Jerusalem school of Kabbalah. It is also known that Tzayach and the Radbaz corresponded with each other. An important disciple of the Radbaz in Egypt was Rabbi Betzalel Ashkenazi, renowned as the author of the Shita Mikubetzet, a most important Talmudic commentary. But beyond this, along with the Radbaz, Rabbi Betzalel was the one who introduced the Ari into the mysteries of the Kabbalah. The second important Joseph who had been exiled from Spain was Rabbi Joseph Taitatzak, who had settled in Salonika. Renowned as one of the greatest sages of his time, he counted among his disciples such luminaries as Rabbi Samuel de Modena, the Maharashdam, Isaac Adrabi, and Joseph Caro. A younger contemporary, Rabbi Eliyahu de Vidas, writes in his Reshit Chochmah, "I heard that the sage, Rabbi Joseph Taitatzak of blessed memory, did not sleep in a bed for 40 years, except on the Sabbath. It is told that he used to sleep on a box, with his feet hanging down, and that he would get up at midnight. No one knew about this, and it was only revealed by his wife after he died." One of Taitatzak's most important disciples in Kabbalah was Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz, a native of Salonika, best known as the author of the Friday night hymn Lecha Dodi. It was he who was destined to initiate the Ramak into the mysteries of the Kabbalah. In 1522, the year of the Ramak's birth, another event took place that had a profound effect on the Jewish community. This was the pilgrimage of David Reuveni, a cryptical messianic figure from Khaybar on the Arabian Peninsula, who was able to stand up before popes and kings. Traveling through Egypt in 1523, Reuveni reports seeking an audience with Abraham Castro, and it is also possible that he met with the Radbaz. A year later, Reuveni gained an audience with Pope Clement VII, who was apparently very impressed with his visitor from Arabia. During Reuveni's travels, he arrived in Portugal, where he was accepted in the court of King John III. It was there that he met the king's scribe, Shlomo Molcho, a Marrano who had been baptized under the name of Diogo Pires. Like many Marranos of that period, he had studied Judaism secretly and was proficient in Bible and Talmud. Portugal had been the site of a great Kabbalistic school, producing such luminaries as Rabbi Judah Haidt and Judah Albertini, and it is quite possible that Molcho had also come into contact with a remnant of this school that had survived the expulsion and had gone into hiding. Upon meeting Reuveni in 1525, Molcho circumcised himself and fled to Salonika. What happened next is somewhat vague. In Salonika, Molcho was drawn into the circle of Rabbi Joseph Taitatzak, and apparently learned much Kabbalah from him. On the other hand, Molcho seemed much more adept in the meditative Kabbalah than Taitatzak, possibly on the basis of mysteries he had learned while still in Portugal. By means of meditative devices that we shall discuss, Molcho was able to communicate with a Maggid, a kind of angelic spokesman. Apprised of these methods, Taitatzak also made use of them, and before long, he was also in communication with a Maggid. There are reports that Molcho also traveled to the Holy Land, possibly communicating with the Kabbalists of Jerusalem and Tzfat. He met with Pope Clement VII in 1530, and having gained respect in the Vatican, was adored by the Jews of Rome. A dangerous trap in meditation is that it often makes one feel that he has superhuman powers, when these powers are actually non-existent. And it appears that Molcho fell into this trap. In 1532, Molcho sought an audience with Charles V, King of Spain and Holy Roman Emperor. As a leader who had engaged in many religious battles, Charles was unimpressed with this upstart and had him handed over to the Inquisition. Since Molcho had been baptized as a Catholic in Portugal, he was tried as a renegade and burned at the stake for heresy. Years later, Molcho's example was taken as a warning for those who would venture too far into the mysteries of the meditative Kabbalah. A few years later, in the mid-1530s, 3 individuals came to Tzfat, and these were to make the city a center of scholarship and mysticism. The first was the 30-year-old Shlomo Alkabetz of Salonika, a disciple of Rabbi Joseph Taitatzak, who had already earned a reputation as a brilliant Kabbalist. The young Moshe Cordovero, who had recently celebrated his bar mitzvah, looked upon him with awe, never realizing that he would someday become his most famous disciple. The second individual was Rabbi Jacob Birab, a native of Castile, who had been expelled from Spain as a teenager. After spending a number of years in Portugal, Morocco, and Algiers, he settled in Egypt in 1523, where he came under the influence of the Radbaz. It is also possible that he had met David Reuveni, who had passed through Egypt around that time. Already renowned as an important sage, Birab was almost 50 when he settled in Tzfat in 1535. A year later, upon the death of Rabbi Joseph Saragosi, he was appointed chief rabbi of the community. The third new arrival was Rabbi Joseph Caro, author of the Shulchan Aruch, Set Table, the recognized code of Jewish law. Born in Toledo, he was only 4 years old when his family was expelled from Spain and emigrated to Portugal. Recognized as a prodigy even at this tender age, he studied together with Rabbi Jacob Birab, who was 14 years his senior, while they both were in Lisbon. With the expulsion of Jews from Portugal in 1498, he emigrated to Constantinople, and from there to Adrianople in European Turkey. By the time he was 20, Caro was recognized as a leading expert in Jewish law. In 1522, the year of the Ramak's birth and David Reuveni's emergence, he began his magnum opus, the Beit Yosef, House of Joseph. This book brought together for the first time, in a single volume, virtually every decision that had ever been rendered in Jewish law. Caro worked at this task for 20 years, and this monumental work later became the basis for his better-known Shulchan Aruch. While in Adrianopolis, Caro met Shlomo Molcho and was very much impressed with him. The two became close, and it was from Molcho that the great legalist learned the meditative techniques involved in communicating with a Maggid. In 1533, a year after Molcho's execution, Caro moved to Salonika, where he established a major Talmudical academy. He became close friends with Rabbi Joseph Taitatzak, and apparently reviewed the techniques for summoning a Maggid with him. It was on the festival of Shavuot, Pentecost, probably in 1535, that a Maggid first revealed itself to Caro, and the revelations of this Maggid are recorded in a most interesting book, Maggid Misharim. At the urging of his Maggid, Caro emigrated to the Holy Land, settling in Tzfat in 1537. There he found a community that had grown to over 1,000 Jewish families, and he rapidly established himself as a leading figure in the academy of Rabbi Jacob, his older tutor from Lisbon. It was not long before the two brilliant minds devised a scheme that, if successful, would alter the entire structure of Jewish life, and possibly also hasten the coming of the Messiah. What they had in mind was nothing less than to re-establish the ancient rite of ordination. This ordination had far-reaching legal consequences, and had been handed down from master to disciple from the time of Moses until the 4th century. Then, as a result of persecutions in the Holy Land, The chain had been broken. The great Moses Maimonides had written that this smicha ordination would have to be re-established before the coming of the Messiah. He also wrote that even if there was no master to confer it, it could be granted to any sage by the mutual consent of all the rabbis in the Holy Land. Since the majority of such rabbis resided in Tzfat at the time, Birab and Karo felt that the other communities would go along once the project was initiated. In 1538, the rabbis of Tzfat unanimously decided to confer this ordination on Rabbi Jacob Birab. There was one rabbi, however, who refused to accept this ordination. That was the Ralbach, Rabbi Levi ibn Habib, chief rabbi of Jerusalem, and a result of his opposition, the question of ordination erupted into a major controversy. As a result, Birab was forced to leave his post and flee to Damascus. Before leaving, he conferred this special smicha ordination on 4 of his most outstanding disciples. This smicha was the highest academic honor that could be conferred on an individual, and it indicated that he had mastered all areas of Talmudic and legal scholarship. 3 of the recipients were mature rabbis, who were already renowned as the leading luminaries of that period. These were Rabbi Joseph Karo, Moshe of Trani, and Joseph Sagis. The 4th was a 16-year-old youth, the Ramak. Rabbi Jacob Birab died in 1541 and was succeeded as rabbi of Tzfat by Rabbi Joseph Karo. A year later, Karo completed his monumental Beit Yosef, a work that would establish him for all times as a leading authority in Jewish law. That same year, at the age of 20, the Ramak heard a voice urging him to begin studying Kabbalah with Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz. He was thus initiated into the mysteries of the Zohar and mastered the text completely. This failed to satisfy him, however, since the teachings of the Zohar are often vague, and its system does not have a discernible structure. In order to clarify this in his own mind, the Ramak began writing 2 books. The first, which has only recently been published, was Or Yakar, The Precious Light, a huge commentary on the Zohar. It was the second book, however, that was his magnum opus. Known as the Pardes Rimonim, Orchard of Pomegranates, or simply as the Pardes, it was a systematization of all Kabbalistic thought up to that time. Especially important was the fact that the Ramak reconciled many early schools with the teachings of the Zohar, demonstrating the essential unity of Kabbalah. Using the same close logic that Karo had used in his legal works, the Ramak shows how the Kabbalistic system has a self-consistent philosophical basis. Were it not for the fact that philosophy and Kabbalah are usually considered to be antagonistic, the Pardes would be considered a classic of philosophical analysis, as well as one of Kabbalah. Soon after the completion of the Pardes in 1548, the Ramak began engaging in Gerushin meditation, together with other members of Alkabetz's group. This was also the same year in which Rabbi Joseph Tzayach completed his She'erit Yosef in Jerusalem. The Ramak was familiar with Tzayach's methods, as well as those of Abulafia, but he apparently preferred a different method, known as Gerushin, which was apparently related to that used to evoke a Magid. An excerpt from Magid Misharim. The Magid declared, "Whenever you are in a pure place, constantly think about Torah, fear of God, and my Mishnah. Do not abandon Torah and fear, even for a second, even when you eat and speak. Your tongue should be the heaviest limb of your body, like it was for the last few days. All your limbs must constantly be unified toward my service, fear, and Torah. Recall what the Talmud says about Rav, that he never spoke an idle word all his life. This is what a person must do. He must integrate all of his thoughts toward the fear of God and his worship. It is thus written, 'My son, give me your heart. Let your eyes observe my ways.' Proverbs chapter 23, verse 26. This means that when you keep a commandment or study Torah, Your heart should be unified to God, and you should not think about anything else. This should certainly be true when you pray. Nullify every thought that enters your heart. Banish the evil urge and its host, as well as the forces of Samael and the serpent, which accompany this. Unify your heart constantly, at all times, so that every instant you will think of nothing other than God, His Torah, and His worship. This is the mystery of unity, through which a person literally unifies himself with his Creator. The soul attaches itself to Him and becomes one with Him, so that the body literally becomes a dwelling place of the divine presence. This is what the Torah means when it says, "You shall fear God your Lord, and you shall serve Him and attach yourself to Him." Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 20. Therefore, my son, complete a perfect unification. If you do so, then I will give you a place to walk among those angels who stand here. I will make you worthy to go to the land of Israel, and to come together with my beloved Shlomo Molcho. 2. Colors. We have already discussed the method of ascending through the Sephirot using the names of God, especially as elucidated in Rabbi Joseph Gikatalia's Sha'arei Orah, Gates of Light. The Ramak echoes this, and in his Pardes states that the main reason why the Sephirot were created was to provide a ladder upon which one could climb to the highest spiritual levels. The method taught by the Ramak and other members of the Tzfat school aims at a greater degree of unification than that embraced by Gikatalia's school. This system, based on the Zohar, makes use of no other name than the Tetragrammaton. The Sephirot are represented by 10 different vowel points. One can then meditate on the Tetragrammaton with these different vowel points, and in this manner, bind himself to whichever Sephirah he desires. Although one can simply meditate on the names as they would be written in a book, this technique is greatly enhanced when colors are used. When each name is colored with a shade appropriate to that Sephirah, one can bind himself to that Sephirah all the more intimately. The system of colors is discussed at length in the works of Rabbi Joseph Tzayach, and the Ramak was apparently aware of these writings. But while Tzayach makes no attempt to relate his system to that of the Zohar, the Ramak shows that the two are both an identical tradition. Excerpts from Pardes Rimonim. The 9th gate, the gate of colors. In many places in Kabbalistic texts and the Zohar, we find that various colors parallel the Sephirot. One must be very careful and not imagine that this is to be taken literally. Color is something physical, used to describe the physical world, and the Sephirot, which are spiritual, should not be described with physical properties. If a person thinks that these are literally the colors of the Sephirot, he destroys the entire system and oversteps the boundaries set by the ancients. One who delves into this should therefore be most careful not to assume that anything physical is implied. But actually, these colors allude to the results that are transmitted from the highest roots. Thus, for example, Gvura, strength, is responsible for victory in war. Since this involves bloodshed, where red blood is spilt, it is fitting to ascribe the color red to this Sephirah. The color red likewise expresses hatred, anger, and rage. This is obvious. We therefore ascribe the color red to the place of judgment. Furthermore, everything that is red is derived from the power of this root. This has been discussed in detail in the Gate of Essence and Function. Likewise, the color white indicates mercy and peace. This is because people with white hair are usually merciful. Thus, for example, the elders and aged do not usually fight in armies. Therefore, if you wish to depict peace and the Sephirah of Chesed, love, you depict it with the color white. There is no question that things that are white emanate from the power of this root. This too has been explained in the above-mentioned gate. This, then, is the proper interpretation of the relationship between the colors and the Sephirot. The colors are used allegorically to allude to their functions and results. The Sephirot do not exist in a spatial continuum, and therefore, it is impossible to differentiate them except through allegory. This can only be done when we use colors to allegorically represent the Sephirot. We can then imagine the Sephirot as being differentiated, ascending or increasing, according to the relation between one color and another. The dynamics of the Sephirot can therefore be alluded to completely through the interplay of colors. All this is to ease the physical ear, allowing the verbal expression of these concepts. Colors and the Sephirot. Keter, crown, blinding invisible white. Chokhmah, wisdom, a color that includes all colors. Binah, understanding, yellow and green. Chesed, love, white and silver. Gvurah, strength, red and gold. Tiferet, beauty, yellow and purple. Netzach, victory, light pink. Hod, splendor, dark pink. Yesod, foundation, orange. Malchut, kingship, blue. There is no question that the colors can thus serve as a door to the dynamics of the Sephirot. They are also useful in transmitting influence from a given Sephirah. Thus, if you wish to transmit the influence of mercy from the Sephirah of Chesed, love, meditate on the color associated with this Sephirah. Depict the color of the attribute that you desire. If you wish pure mercy, then this color will be a pure white. If your request involves a lesser degree of mercy, depict a softer white, like that of the mortar of the temple. We will discuss this further in the gate of Kavanot. Therefore, if an individual wishes to accomplish something through the transmission of judgment, he should wear red vestments. He then meditates on the tetragrammaton, depicting it in red letters. Similarly, in any activity where one wishes mercy and desires to transmit the power of chesed, love, he should wear white vestments. This is clearly seen from the Kohen priests. Their function was to transmit power from the side of chesed, love. They therefore wore white vestments, which indicate peace. On Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the high priest would likewise remove his golden vestments and wear white. The entire service that day was performed in white vestments, and the reason given is that an accuser does not become an advocate, since gold denotes judgment. The white, however, indicates the mercy that the high priest was seeking. The same principle holds true for amulets. When one makes an amulet, kameya, to transmit chesed, love, he should draw the necessary name in brilliant white letters. This will enhance the effectiveness of the name. Likewise, when one seeks judgment, he should draw the name associated with judgment in red. Goat's blood is often used for this purpose, since both its color and source then allude to judgment. These things are well known and are obvious to those who write amulets, even though we have no portion in these practices. It is thus known that when names are drawn on amulets, those which involve judgment are drawn in red, those involving love in white, and those pertaining to mercy in green. This is all known through Magidim, who taught the methods of writing amulets. All this teaches that the colors can serve as a channel for the forces that are transmitted from on high. This also closely parallels the rites of some idolaters. When they offer incense, they know how to influence the power of a particular sign of the zodiac. While performing these rites, they would wear vestments whose color was associated with their actions. Clear evidence to this concept can be seen in the breastplate of the high priest. This contained 12 precious stones, each one being a different color, alluding to the transmission of power from the spiritual source of each of the 12 tribes. Do not reject this concept. The alchemists teach that when a person gazes at running water, the white bile is aroused in him. Thus, when a person has insomnia and cannot sleep, they set pipes with running water in front of him in order to arouse the white bile. This increases the moisture in his body, and he is able to sleep. The same is true in our case. When an initiate flies with his mind, he finds this invaluable. Colors that are visible to the eye, or which are depicted in the mind, can have an effect on the spiritual, even though the colors themselves are physical. The nefesh, lower soul, can motivate the ruach, middle spirit, and the ruach in turn motivates the neshama, upper soul. The neshama then ascends from one essence to the next until it reaches its source. It can then be motivated by what it imagines. These thoughts are like a mirror to the divine countenance. Through the thoughts transmitted to the source of the neshama, the countenance can be made to appear red. It then transmits an influence associated with the color red back to this source. The same can be true of the color white. This is explained in the Gate of Pipes, Chapter 1. All influence on the lower countenance is the result of human action, as explained in the Gate of Essence and Function, Chapter 18. The 32nd Gate, the Gate of Kavanot, Chapter 1. In the previous gate, we have discussed how man is a portion of God from on high. If one is pure and upright indeed, and if he grasps the cords of love, which exist in the holy roots of his soul, he can ascend to every level in all the supernal universes. All this has been discussed in the previous gate. When a person is upright and righteous, he can meditate, kaven, with appropriate thoughts, and ascend through the levels of the transcendental. He must unify the levels of his soul, joining one part to another, bringing the different levels of his soul to vest themselves in each other. It then becomes like a single candelabrum, made of different parts joined together. The individual must then unify the Sephirot, bringing them to bind themselves together with a powerful knot. He and his soul then become a channel through which the Sephirot can exert influence. All of them, from the highest to the lowest, then act in concert through the powerful cord that binds them together. For when a person binds his soul to the supernal soul through his Mishnah, it causes the roots to be bound together with a strong knot. Chapter 2. We must now explain the idea of meditating on the Sephirot, since there is some confusion in this area. Commenting on the verse, "Who is a great nation that has God close to them, like the Lord, Yud and He and Vav and He, our God, whenever we call him?" Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 7. The Sifri states, "We call to him and not to his attributes." This is also logical. Why should we approach the king's servants rather than the king himself? It is certainly fitting that we pray only to the master of all treasuries. This being true, why are all our prayers associated with the various Sephirot? The question becomes even stronger when we realize that every word alludes to a different Sephirah. Therefore, if one keeps his mind on the inner essence of his words, it comes out that all his prayers allude to the Sephirot. We are left with nothing that is directed to the source of sources. Besides this, how is it possible to meditate on the Sephirot? If a person attempts to depict any Sephirah in his mind, it is inevitable that he will delineate it and depict it as something physical. The mind can only depict physical things, so how can he imagine a purely spiritual concept? The mind's eye cannot imagine spiritual entities without making them finite and physical. It is therefore impossible to meditate on a sephirah. There is also a third difficulty. When a person thinks about any one of the attributes, it is inevitable that he will separate it from the rest. In his mind, he imagines a separate attribute, distinct from all the others. This is certainly not proper, since they all must be unified. This is well known. We will now explain the meaning of this and clarify all these concepts. It is necessary to realize that the infinite being, Ein Sof, the blessed King of Kings, cannot be encompassed by any name or word. It is not correct to speak of any attributes in this essence, since it does not change and cannot be described. It cannot be altered, first having one desire and then another, or first engaging in one activity and then in another. Therefore, when one meditates on the infinite being, he should not call it El or Eloha or Elohim or any other name or appellation. All of these names only pertain to the Sephirot. But, as we have already said, one should not direct his intent toward the Sephirot, heaven forbid, since one who does so falls into a deep pit. It is with regard to this that the Sifri says, "to him and not to his attributes." The true intent, however, is as we have explained in the Gate of Essence and Vessels. God is called mighty through the attribute of Gvura, strength. This is because it is he who gives the Sephirah of Gvura, strength, the power to act. The same is true of greatness, which is associated with the Sephirah of Chesed, love. Therefore, when a person says, "the great God," in the Amidah, he should meditate on the fact that this alludes to greatness, the Sephirah of Chesed, love, and that the word itself is in greatness. Still, his intent should not be directed to the Sephirah itself, but to the infinite being, which is the essence that permeates greatness. The same is true of Gvura, strength, and the other Sephirot. The words are therefore appellations for the various attributes in the Sephirot, and they are adjectives pertaining to God. The intent, however, is directed only toward the infinite being, who is clothed in the Sephirot and makes use of them. In the Tikkun Zohar, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, "Whenever one pronounces a word, he must keep in mind that speech is Adoshem. The voice is Yud and He and Vav and He. One must bring them together, unifying them in the concealed unity, Ein Sof, which binds them together and makes them as one. One's intent must be directed to this alone. This is not voice or speech, but thought. It is explicitly taught that the Tetragrammaton, Yud and He and Vav and He, is associated with the Sephirah of Tiferet, beauty. Since the voice that emanates from God's mouth is also associated with Tiferet, it is related to the Tetragrammaton. Similarly, speech is related to the name Adoshem, which is associated with the Sephirah of Malchut, kingship. Thought, however, is the infinite being, Ein Sof, through which these two attributes are unified. In the entire worship service, there is no allusion to the infinite being, Ein Sof, other than the thought that the worshipper directs toward it. This, however, is everything. It unifies all the attributes and influences. This is the mystery of the basic essence that infuses all the Sephirot, through which the Sephirot have power to function. Due to this, the action itself is also ascribed to this essence. This is explained in detail in the Gate of Essence and Vessels. This does not mean that one should meditate on the Sephirot or try to imagine them, since this is impossible, as we have already explained. Rather, It means that the Sephirot are associated with 10 names, spelled with the 4 letters of the Tetragrammaton. These names are only differentiated by their vowels, as explained in the gate of the Tetragrammaton. The names are given in the table. One who meditates should concentrate on these names. He should keep in mind that nothing can allude to the attribute that he seeks other than the Tetragrammaton that is depicted in his mind. These consist of the 4 letters vocalized in the appropriate manner. If he does this, he can proceed without fear. One should also keep in mind that these 4 letters themselves allude to the 10 Sephirot. This denotes the fact that all 10 Sephirot agree to the action desired of any single Sephirah. It is best if one can depict each Tetragrammaton in the color associated with the particular Sephirah. His prayer will then help all the more. The only condition is that he should keep in mind that nothing in this world can depict the action of that attribute, other than the color associated with it. 3. Rabbi Chaim Vital. It would appear appropriate to place the chapter dealing with Rabbi Chaim Vital after that dealing with the Ari, since he was a disciple of the latter. But Chaim Vital was more closely associated with the older schools of Kabbalah, while the Ari used the Zohar to blaze a completely new trail. The disciple will therefore be discussed first. The output of Chaim Vital was prodigious. If not for him, very little, if any, of the Ari's teachings would even be known. But even though Rabbi Chaim was strongly influenced by the Ari, he was only a disciple for less than 2 years. Within a decade after his master's death, he was showing increased signs of independence and began delving into the teaching of the older schools once again. At one point, the Ari came to him in a dream and asked, "Why have you forgotten me?" One of the most remarkable books about the meditative Kabbalah, and one of the very few ever printed, was Chaim Vital's Sha'arei Kedusha, Gates of Holiness. Although the author states that he learned these methods from the Ari, much of the material comes from older sources. Indeed, the unpublished 4th section of this book consists almost entirely of quotations from older texts. Rabbi Chaim Vital was a most unusual individual. Possessing an extremely brilliant mind, he was acknowledged as an expert in Kabbalah even before he met the Ari. At the time of this first meeting, he was engaged in writing a commentary on the Zohar. Although only 27 at the time, he was already an outstanding expert in alchemy, astronomy, astrology, Kabbalistic magic, and all the occult arts. When Chaim Vital first heard of the Ari, he hesitated to visit him, considering himself a far superior Kabbalist. It did not take long before Rabbi Chaim became aware of the Ari's superior vision and insight, but the Ari also saw his main disciple in this lofty soul. On one occasion, he tells Chaim Vital that he had come to Tzfat especially to teach him, and at another time, he told his disciple that he had been born into this world only to teach him. The disciple himself was an expert in all Kabbalistic meditations and was aware of all schools. In many ways, his Sha'arei Kedusha, especially the 4th part, is an anthology of these teachings. Rabbi Chaim was born in 1543 in Tzfat to Rabbi Joseph Vital, who was also known as Calabrese, since his family originated in Calabria, the toe of Italy's boot. Rabbi Joseph was a scribe who specialized in making tefillin, and the tefillin capsules that he made were famed as the finest available. Chaim's childhood in Tzfat must have been fascinating, since this city had become one of the most important hubs of Jewish thought, both Kabbalistic and otherwise. He was a child of 5 when the Ramak completed his great Pardes Rimonim, and at the age of 7, he saw the first printed copies of Rabbi Joseph Caro's monumental legal work, the Beit Yosef. As a 10-year-old lad, he witnessed the return to Tzfat of the great Radbaz, who had served as chief rabbi of Cairo for over 40 years. Tzfat was a city steeped in Kabbalah, not only in its theoretical and philosophical forms, but also in its most occult aspects. The city abounded with chiromancers, oil drop readers, and fortune tellers, and Rabbi Chaim even associated with Arab mystics, who were involved in crystal gazing and geomancy. Although the Ari disapproved of these practices, soon after his master's death, Chaim Vital renewed his interest in them. Shortly after his bar mitzvah, Chaim became a student of Rabbi Moshe Alshech. The Alshech, as he is usually called, is best known as the author of Torah Moshe, which is considered to be the most important homiletic commentaries ever written on the Bible. A native of Adrianople, he studied there under Rabbi Joseph Karo, and later in Salonika, under Joseph Taitatzak. In Tzfat, Karo was told by his Maggid to speak to Alshech and instruct him to pay attention to the young Chaim Vital, since he was an extraordinary soul and would someday be an important leader. In 1558, when Vital was 15 years old, an event took place that would permanently change the entire status of the Kabbalah. This was the first printing of the Zohar in Mantua, Italy. There had been considerable dispute regarding the propriety of openly publishing a text that dealt with the highest mysteries, but a leading authority, Rabbi Isaac de Lattis, rendered a decision permitting it. The Zohar would now not just be the province of those well enough connected to procure a manuscript copy, but would be available for all who wished to purchase it. Rabbi Chaim was married at the age of 22, but for some reason could not consummate the marriage for 9 months, during which time he was led into very serious temptations. It was around this time that he also became a disciple of the Ramak in Kabbalah, and his brilliant mind mastered the complex system with relative ease. Before long, he had begun his own commentary on the Zohar, following the Ramak's principles. Still, he was hounded by temptations, and for some 2 years, abandoned his studies almost completely. Seeking advice from the ancient Radbaz, Vital was informed of the Kabbalistic school in Damascus, possibly that of Rabbi Joseph Tzayach, who was still teaching there at the time. Rabbi Chaim went to Damascus in 1569, continuing his work on the Zohar commentary. He was soon to be brought back to Tzfat by an event that would make the city a citadel of Kabbalah, the arrival of the Ari. The relationship between the Ari and Chaim Vital is most significant, and will be discussed at length in the next chapter. In all, Vital was the Ari's disciple for only 22 months, but during this time, he was able to absorb a prodigious amount. He became the leading expounder of the Ari's system, writing over a dozen large volumes on the subject. After the death of the Ari in 1572, Chaim Vital frequently saw him in dreams, but as the years passed, these nocturnal visits became increasingly infrequent. Rabbi Chaim soon began giving his own lectures in Kabbalah, and in 1576 went to Egypt, possibly to link up with the Kabbalistic school founded by Abraham Castro, which used Tzayach's methods. From there, he returned to Jerusalem, where in 1590 he received the smicha ordination from Rabbi Moshe Alshech, who had in turn received it from Joseph Karo. Rabbi Chaim Vital settled in Damascus in 1594, and with the exception of occasional visits to Tzfat, remained there until his death in 1620. 4. Gates of Holiness. Rabbi Chaim Vital's Sha'arei Kedusha, Gates of Holiness, stands alone as being the only textbook of Kabbalistic meditation ever printed. Indeed, the 4th section, which deals with the specific methods, was never published. The printer of the first edition, which came out in 1738, states that it is for this reason that this section must remain unpublished, as we have discussed in the introduction. Although this remarkable book has gone into over 30 editions, the 4th section has never been published, It is not known precisely when this book was written, but it was obviously written a number of years after the Ari's death, when his influence no longer overwhelmed Chaim Vital. Missing from this book is the kaleidoscope style that distinguishes Vital's earlier writings, where he is basically expounding the teachings of the Ari. Furthermore, very little is mentioned of the method of yichudim, unifications, which, as we shall hear in the next chapter, was the main meditative technique advocated by the Ari. Still, even though he is clearly his own man in this book, the author does not forget his indebtedness to his master. He writes, "In this book, I will explain mysteries that were not grasped by earlier generations. These I received from the lips of the holy man, the angel of the Lord of hosts, the godly Rabbi Isaac Luria, of blessed memory." Although this would seem to indicate that the methods discussed in Sha'arei Kedusha were taught by the Ari, there is considerable evidence to the contrary. In all the voluminous literature that is attributed to the Ari, we find no evidence of these methods, especially those discussed in the 4th section. Rabbi Chaim, however, leaves very little doubt that he himself made use of these methods. He writes, "In the 4th section, I will speak of the methods themselves, through which one attains Ruach HaKodesh. I myself have tried and tested them, and found them to be authentic." Although the 4th section was never published, it exists in a number of manuscripts, some in private hands, and a few in library collections. One of the greatest surprises in this unpublished section is the fact that it begins by advocating the methods of Rabbi Abraham Abulafia, as taught in his Chaye Olam Haba, Life of the Future World. After a discussion of this method, Vital goes on to quote a long portion from the Abulafia's Sefer HaCheshek, Book of Passion, without actually quoting it by name. This advocacy of Abulafia's methods may have been one of the underlying reasons why this 4th section was never printed. Such highly respected authorities as the Rashba, Rabbi Judah Haidt, and Yashar of Kandia had denounced Abulafia's works in no uncertain terms. If it had been publicly known that Rabbi Chaim Vital had advocated these methods, the entire status of his teachings may have been undermined. A good deal of the material in this 4th section has been published elsewhere, and this includes quotations from the works of the Ramban, Rabbi Menachem Rekanati, and Rabbi Judah Haidt. Of particular interest is the context in which he quotes the Ramban's Igeret HaMusar, Epistle of Admonishment, which the latter had sent to his son in Barcelona. Although this is usually cited merely as an inspirational text, here it is quoted as an important method for attaining enlightenment. Here can also be found a number of quotations from the works of Rabbi Isaac of Akko. The most important of these is his discussion of Stoicism, taken from his Me'irat Einayim, which we have already quoted. Also to be found here are a number of other quotations from Rabbi Isaac of Akko, which are also included in Rabbi Eliyahu Davidas' Reshit Chochmah, Beginning of Wisdom. Rabbi Chaim Vital also provides the complete text of the Gate of Kavanot, which we have also discussed earlier, as well as a similar text that appears to advocate a very similar method. One of the most significant things that we find in this 4th section is some insight into Rabbi Joseph Caro's Maggid, the angelic spokesman who came to him and taught him. It is well established that this Maggid was closely associated with Caro's intense study of the Mishnah, the earliest codification of the Oral Torah. In this context, it is important to say something about the nature of the Mishnah. The original Jewish tradition consisted of 2 parts, often referred to as 2 Torahs. The first was the written Torah, which consisted of the well-known scroll. The second, however, was called the Oral Torah, and it consisted of the unwritten tradition given to Moses on Sinai. This oral tradition was handed down by word of mouth until the harsh Roman persecutions threatened to extinguish it completely. Finally, around the year 205, Rabbi Judah the Prince compiled it into a written code. It is significant to note that, while not included in this Mishnah, the main body of the Kabbalah was also part of this same oral tradition. Here, in the fourth part of Sha'arei Kedusha, the author also speaks about a type of hitbodedut meditation, where one meditates on a passage from the Mishnah, often simply called a Mishnah. The initiate is instructed to seclude himself in a room, wrap himself in his prayer shawl, and sit with his eyes closed. He is then to depict himself leaving behind his body and ascending to heaven. When the initiate reaches this state, he is to take a passage from the Mishnah and repeat it over and over, like a mantra. This produces a very high meditative state, where one can actually clothe himself in the soul of the sage of the Mishnah. If one does this correctly, that sage will actually speak through the initiate's mouth. Alternatively, he may visualize a mystical message. Although it is not definite that this was the method used by Karo, it is certainly very closely related. In one place, Karo mentions that he communicated with his Maggid after reading several chapters from the Mishnah. Even if he did not repeat the same text over and over, he was so familiar with the Mishnah that reciting any part could be used as a technique for clearing his mind. It is also significant to note that Rabbi Chaim Vital also made use of this method. In his diary, he speaks of inducing a state of hitbodedut meditation by repeating a Mishnah 3 times. Although this took place shortly after he came under the influence of the Ari, from the context, it is evident that he was aware of this method even earlier. There is a distinct possibility that he may have learned it from Rabbi Joseph Karo. It is also important to note the apparent similarity between this method and that of Girushin, used by the Ramak. Also very significant in this fourth section is the discussion of how to do meditation involving yichudim, unifications. Although this is discussed at length in the teachings of the Ari, as we shall hear in the next chapter, there is no mention there of the precise techniques. Here, in Sha'arei Kedusha, however, a very similar method is discussed, and the technique is spelled out in detail. The initiate is to spend the entire day in preparation, immersed in Torah study, not speaking any unnecessary words, and concluding with actual immersion in the mikvah. He is then to seclude himself, wear white garments, and divest himself of all physical sensation. Mentally, he then ascends from one firmament to the next, until he reaches the highest one, which is called Aravot. When one reaches this level, he is to depict the firmament as a tremendous white curtain. Upon this curtain is the name or letter combination upon which he is meditating. The letters are written in Ashurit, the script to write a Torah. Each letter appears brilliantly white, but at the same time, it is shaded with the color appropriate to the particular Sephirot with which it is associated. After depicting the letters in this manner, one must expand them until they fill the entire mind. Each letter should appear as a dazzling white mountain, filling the entire field of vision. One can then combine the letters or names, or alternatively, permute the letters through the methods of tziruf. This method provides important insight into the method of yichudim, as well as techniques involving meditation on divine names, as taught by Rabbi Joseph G. Catalia and the Ramak. But what is also highly significant is the close parallels to these methods found in other systems of Kabbalah meditation. Thus, in his Chaye Olam Haba, Abulafia speaks of a very similar technique. He says, "The letters are without question the root of all wisdom and knowledge, and they themselves are the substance of prophecy. In a prophetic vision, they appear as if they were solid bodies, actually speaking to the individual. They appear like pure living angels, and sometimes the individual sees them as mountains." A very similar idea is also found in the teachings of Rabbi Isaac of Akko. In his Otzar Chaim, he speaks of the proper methods of meditating on names and prayers. He writes, "One must imagine that before his eyes is a book made entirely of white fire. The letters, words, and combinations that he is reading are written in this book with letters of black fire. As he reads, his physical eyes should be on the words, while his mind's eye should be on the infinite being, Ein Sof." This is very reminiscent of the Talmudic teaching that the original Torah was written with black fire on white fire. The earlier sections of Sha'arei Kedusha deal at length with the preparation that one must undergo before involving oneself in the higher forms of meditation. The text also speaks about the prophetic state at length, as well as that of the Hechalot, and we have presented most of this material elsewhere. Excerpts from Sha'arei Kedusha. The Seventh Gate, Ruach HaKodesh in Our Times. In the previous gate, we have warned the initiate regarding the pitfalls that lie in the road leading to enlightenment. Still, he should not give up. Commenting on the verse, "Deborah was a prophetess," Judges chapter 4, verse 4, the prophet Elijah taught his disciples, "I call heaven and earth to witness that any individual, man or woman, Jew or Gentile, free man or slave, can have Ruach HaKodesh, Holy Spirit, come upon him. It all depends on his deeds." Our own eyes have seen, and our own ears have heard distinguished individuals who have attained the level of Ruach HaKodesh even in our times. Some of these individuals can predict the future. Others have mastered wisdom that had never been revealed to previous generations. In order that those who wish to enter the sanctuary not be discouraged, I will explain a few concepts, opening the door like the eye of a needle. For God will not withhold good from those who walk uprightly. First, I will explain a few general principles involving enlightenment. Then, in the eighth gate, I will discuss a number of specific practices. The best way of all is that taught by Elijah. This was the way of the early saints, Hasidim Rishonim, also known as the Pharisees. The technique is as follows. One must first repent every sin he has ever done, rectifying all the spiritual damage he has caused. He must then perfect his soul through keeping the positive commandments, as well as through complete concentration in prayer and diligent Torah study without ulterior motive. He must continue like an ox under its yoke until the physical becomes weak. This should also include such disciplines as minimizing the amount of food one eats, waking up at midnight, shunning all unworthy traits, separating oneself from other people, and not speaking unnecessary words. One must also constantly purify his body through immersion in the mikvah. After this, one should meditate, hitboded, occasionally on the fear of God. He should mentally depict the letters of the Tetragrammaton. At this time, he should be careful to keep his thoughts away from all worldly vanities, binding himself to the love of God with great passion. Through this, one can be worthy of Ruach HaKodesh in one of the following aspects. The first aspect consists of a transmission to the individual's soul of the highest light, from the root of the highest levels of his soul. Such a revelation is Ruach HaKodesh in its purest form. The second aspect comes about through the study of Torah or observance of some commandment. Our sages taught, when a person keeps a commandment, he earns an advocate, angel. This actually means that an angel is created through one's actions. If this individual does this consistently, according to the law, with great kavanah, then this angel will reveal itself to him. This is the meaning of those angels called magidim, which are mentioned in various writings. But if the commandment is not kept according to the law, halakha, then this angel will be made up of good and evil, combining truth and falsehood. The third aspect is that as a result of one's piety, Elijah will reveal himself to him. The greater one's piety, the greater will be his enlightenment. The fourth aspect is greater than the previous two. This involves the revelation of the soul of a tzaddik, saint, who has already passed away. This tzaddik may share the same root with the individual's soul, or may come from other roots. This aspect can come about through the proper observance of a commandment, just like the previous aspects. People who are worthy of this attain a level where they gain knowledge of high wisdom and the hidden mysteries of the Torah. This, too, depends on one's deeds. The fifth aspect is the lowest of them all. This involves dreams, where the future and other knowledge is revealed to the individual. This is also close to Ruach HaKodesh. The method discussed earlier brings one on a straight path. The individual does not use mystical oaths to bind the supernal beings, but only resorts to the power of his good deeds and sanctification of the self. He can then be assured that the Ruach HaKodesh that he attains will be pure, without any admixture of evil whatsoever. This, however, is not true when a person attempts to coerce the supernal beings. It is true that one may have success through methods involving mystical oaths, specific actions, prayers, and yichudim, but if one makes the slightest error, it is possible that his revelation will be intermingled with outside forces. There are also other methods involving specific techniques, which will be discussed in the fourth section. These can bring the above-mentioned aspects to a person even when they do not come automatically. Those methods, however, require great holiness and purity, since otherwise, they will give rise to a mixed revelation, as mentioned above. The first way that we have discussed, however, is the path taken by the earlier generations. It is the path referred to by the Ramban in his commentary on the Torah. This is also the significance of Ben Azai's experience, when he would simply study and would be surrounded by burning flames, as the Ramban explains in his Igeret HaKodesh, Holy Epistle. The eighth gate, methods of sanctifying oneself. One must purify himself in 4 ways. First, one must repent all of his sins, whether they involve violating the Torah's prohibitions, neglecting its positive commandments, or even transgressing rabbinical laws or adhering to unworthy traits. Such repentance must include a resolve never to repeat the sin or return to the bad trait. Such repentance is especially important for sins for which the Torah prescribes a penalty of being spiritually cut off, or those which involve a desecration of God's name. This includes violation of the Sabbath, the menstrual rules, sexual pollution, oaths, even if they involve the truth, gazing at forbidden members of the opposite sex, malicious gossip, tale-bearing, mockery, and idle chatter. One must also keep himself from pride, anger, oversensitivity, and depression, behaving with modesty and humility, and rejoicing in his portion. The second purification involves the meticulous observance of all 248 commandments of the Torah, which parallel the 248 parts of the human body, as well as the legislated commandments. Particularly, it involves keeping set times for Torah study, praying with Kavanot, reciting all blessings and grace after meals with Kavanot, loving one's fellow man, and honoring the Sabbath in every detail. One should also wake up each night at midnight to study Torah and mourn for Jerusalem. Whatever one does should be with love, for the sake of heaven. The third and fourth purifications involve specific preparations through which one sanctifies himself for Ruach HaKodesh. The first of these involves purification of the body through immersion in the mikveh and clean clothing. The second should be done when one actually prepares to receive Ruach HaKodesh, after the other good traits have become part of his nature. You should be in a room by yourself, after immersion and sanctification. It should be a place where you will not be distracted by the sound of human voices or the chirping of birds. The best time to do this is shortly after midnight. Close your eyes and divest your thoughts of all worldly things. It should be as if your soul had left your body, and you should be as devoid of sensation as a corpse. Then, strengthen yourself with a powerful yearning, meditating on the supernal universe. There, you should attach yourself to the root of your soul and to the supernal lights. It should seem as if your soul had left your body and had ascended on high. Imagine yourself standing in the supernal universes. If you make use of a yichud, unification, have in mind that through it, you are transmitting light and sustenance to all universes. Keep in mind that you, too, will receive your portion in the end. Meditate, hitboded, in thought for a short time, and attempt to sense if spirit had rested on you. If you do not feel anything, it can be assumed that you are not fit and ready for it. You should therefore strengthen yourself all the more with worship and holiness. After a few days, you should meditate again in this manner, until you are worthy that the Spirit should rest upon you. When the Spirit rests on you, you must still discern if it is pure and clean, or from the other side, a mixture of good and evil. Keep in mind what happened to Ben Zoma and Ben Azai when they ascended to the orchard. You can discern this through what is revealed. It can consist completely of truth, or it can be truth mixed with falsehood. Occasionally, the revelation will consist of idle concepts, dealing with worldly vanities or ideas that do not conform to the teachings of the Torah. When this occurs, you must repel yourself from it. You must then continue to fortify yourself with worship until the revelation is faithful, based on the fear of heaven. At first, the spirit of Ruach HaKodesh will rest on you occasionally, at distant intervals. The revelation will only involve simple concepts and not deep ideas. Very little will be revealed. But as you progress,